this is the first time that my dad's actually got a bit excited about the person I'm interviewing. Normally he's like, okay. Then I was like, I got Mike Costello, and he's like, oh wow, really? And so because he got me into listening to the podcast you got of Steve Bunce, Five Live Boxing with Costello and Bunce. What's it like working with Steve Bunce? Because I feel like I really like listening to him, but I feel like he's like Marmite in a way. You either love him or hate him. What's it like working with Steve?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I go back a long way with Steve. I mean, I've got a program from our amateur days when we were on the same bill together. He boxed for a club in Southeast London called Fitzroy Lodge. I boxed for a club in Southeast London called the Lynn. And we got to know each other when we were early teenage years. And then as we both started to work in the boxing media, again, picked up in our sort of late 20s. And our paths have been there or thereabouts all the way. And then eventually we got to work together on the BBC. And then at a time in early 2017, when podcasts were really beginning to flourish, it was suggested at the BBC that we do one together, given our background together, given our shared passion. And it took off in a way that I don't think either of us expected it would do. And it was very popular, very successful for those 4.5 years. And as it stands, it's in limbo, but we're still talking to both sides. Matchroom and DAZN are quite keen for it to continue. The BBC have got issues about impartiality, which I completely understand, given that I am now solely working for DAZN stroke Matchroom. So we're waiting to see how that will eventually work itself out. But it was a great time, and I'm a very different character to Steve. But even the people down the years that I've bumped into and said they don't agree with what he said, or they don't necessarily like the way he does it, they all say that he really does know what he's talking about, and that underpins what Steve does. You might not like his opinion. Does he get it right every time? No. Do I get it right every time? No. It's a crazy sport. Just look at the fight we covered at the weekend, Josh Warrington and Mauricio Lara. Was there a soul on the planet outside the Lara camp who told you that Lara was going to win in February? So we're in that mad sport. But Steve's been a joy to work with. And I think what was successful about the podcast was that we're very different characters, and that came across on the podcast. And I think the success of the podcast was around us being able to be ourselves in the way that you're not always allowed to, with the restrictions of airtime and having to go to certain interviews, having to go to news bulletins, having to go to traffic checks, weather checks, or whatever. Whereas on a podcast, you can just roam free and let the thoughts flow. So it's been great working with Steve, and I'm hoping that that at some stage will continue in the future.
Yeah, I really hope it do. The podcast does continue with both you and Steve in the future as well. You're kind of like the calm in the storm in the podcast.